The night was thick with whispers, and the moon hung low and full, as if it too had come to witness what the kingdom dared not speak of aloud. Inside the high stone walls of the palace, a child had been born, wrapped in silk, her eyes dark as coal, her breath soft as wind. The queen wept as she held her, not out of joy but out of a quiet, choking dread that had settled over the court like a suffocating fog. The palace seer, an old woman with milky eyes and a voice like cracking ice, had fallen silent the moment she touched the newborn's forehead. The hush that followed was not one of awe but fear. The child, the seer finally said, will bring darkness. She will walk with the night, and the kingdom shall tremble in her shadow. The king, who had waited for years for an heir, felt a chill deeper than any winter. He had fought wars to secure this throne, spilled the blood of brothers and burned villages for power, and he would not let it be undone by a daughter born under a cursed sign. He stood still, his crown slightly askew, his hand tightening around the hilt of his ceremonial sword. She must not stay, he whispered to his most trusted guard. Take her far. Leave her where even the birds will forget her name. And tell no one. The queen cried out, begging for mercy, but the king's heart had turned to stone. That very night, as the kingdom slept, the child was wrapped in black cloth and carried deep into the dark woods beyond the northern border, where stories of ancient things still stirred in the wind. The forest was no place for a child. Its trees nodded like clenched fists, its silence broken only by the call of night creatures. But as the guard laid the baby down in a cradle of moss beneath a yew tree, something strange happened. The moon, hidden behind thick clouds all night, suddenly broke through, casting a pale silver light upon the forest floor. The shadows, long and sinuous, seemed to lean in, curling gently around the baby as if to cradle her. The guard stepped back uneasy and the baby did not cry. Instead, her small fingers reached out, brushing the leaves, and the wind shifted. It was as if the forest had been waiting. Back at the palace, the queen was locked in her chamber, her tears soaking her sleeves. She whispered her daughter's name into the pillow, Amari. It was a name only the stars heard, a name that would vanish from the scrolls and be struck from the royal line. The forest, however, remembered. Seasons passed. The kingdom never spoke of the girl again. The king ordered all midwives silenced, the seer taken away to the cliffs, and even the queen, once the jewel of the court, was slowly erased from public life. She became a ghost behind the velvet drapes, her eyes always turned northward. But though the king believed he had buried the prophecy, it lived on, in the cracks of the stone walls, in the rustling of branches, and in the moonlight that still refused to leave the sky when it was supposed to. In the forest the child grew. Animals did not fear her. Wolves circled her sleeping place but did not strike. Owls perched near her, whispering secrets in rustling feathers. The shadows taught her to move without sound, and the wind carried voices only she could hear. The forest spirits, once thought to be forgotten, whispered ancient lullabies that wrapped around her soul like smoke. She laughed like the river, strong and flowing, and her feet knew the paths without needing sight. She did not know of crowns or courts, nor of betrayal. But she knew her name, Amari, and that the moon called her daughter. When she was 5, she began to see things in her dreams. A woman in robes weeping in a high tower. A man with a crooked crown drowning in blood. She saw fire sweeping through cities and always at the center of it all, herself, calm, standing in the eye of the storm. The shadows began to answer her, and when she whispered, the trees leaned in. Her steps left frost in summer, and the night bent to her will. The people of the border villages began to speak of the Moonchild, a ghost girl who walked under the silver sky and never aged. Some said she was a blessing, others a curse. But none dared venture into the heart of the forest. Amari didn't know she had been banished. She didn't know she had been born a princess. But she knew she was different. And deep in the soil beneath her feet, the roots of fate twisted and turned, waiting for the moment she would rise. In the palace the king grew old. He had no other children. Wars had weakened his armies and drought had withered the lands. Every year, his sleep grew worse and the dreams came more often, of a girl with eyes like night walking barefoot through fire. He never spoke of her, but in his heart he knew. The prophecy had not been avoided. It had only been delayed. And the moon, high above it all, watched with quiet patience. The forest did not raise her with the kindness of a mother, but with the patience of eternity. It was not soft or gentle. It was ancient, older than the crown her father wore and deeper than the fear that led to her banishment. The beings that watched over her were not human, not by any name whispered in the stone halls of men. They were the forgotten ones, the night kind, the remnants of old power that had once ruled when the world was raw and the stars still new. They found her on the third night after her abandonment, cradled in moss, not crying but watching the shadows with calm eyes. One by one they emerged, some silent as mist, others howling through the trees like wind through a broken flute. A woman with skin like moonlight and hair of woven starlight bent over the child first. Her name was Leone, once a moon goddess, now memory made flesh. She touched the baby's chest and felt the slow rhythm of a heart that beat in tune with the dark. "She is not of them," Leone said, her voice echoing like a bell struck underwater. "She is one of us now." A horned figure stepped from behind the tree trunks. Tall as an oak and twice as rooted, he knelt and peered into the child's eyes. "Her light is shadow-born," he rumbled. "And the shadows remember everything." The forest spirits gathered in council. Creatures shaped like smoke and bone, beings that had no names left in any tongue. They argued not whether to care for her, but how. She was not like them, not yet, but the forest had accepted her. And that meant something. That meant destiny. Leone named her Naya. It was a name that meant of the night, in a language never written, only sung beneath eclipses and blood moons. Naya was neither princess nor orphan in their eyes, she was a vessel, a spark of something old returning. The spirits could feel it in her breath, in the way the shadows clung to her skin like velvet. There was power in her, raw, tangled and aching to be shaped. They did not raise her as humans do, with lullabies and fire-warmed milk. Instead, they wrapped her in silence and star glow. She slept beneath trees that hummed with forgotten hymns and awoke to the hush of roots shifting under the earth. Her lullabies were the songs of wolves echoing over frost. Her teachers were creatures that had not spoken aloud in centuries. Leone taught her to listen. To really listen, not just to words but to silences, to pauses, to the creak of a branch before it snapped, to the breath between a lie and a truth. "The night is never silent," she said. "It just speaks in ways humans forget." Naya learned to move with the night. At 5 she could walk barefoot over twigs without a sound. By 7 she could climb the tallest yew without rustling a single leaf. She danced with shadows and they taught her how to hide in plain sight. She followed moonbeams through the underbrush and memorized the stars not by name, but by the way they felt, which were sharp, which hummed, which ones whispered of storms to come. She didn't fear the darkness. Darkness was her cradle. She wore it like a second skin, and the creatures of light who stumbled into the forest would look right through her, never knowing the girl who watched from just beyond the edge of sight. But it wasn't only stealth she learned. The old ones taught her of power. Not the kind that kings hoard or sorcerers blast from their palms, but deeper magic, rooted in balance, consequence and time. The horned god Oloran placed her hand on the earth and whispered, "Feel it breathe." She did, and in that moment she felt the weight of seasons, the groaning of roots, the weeping of stones and the heartbeat of insects. It overwhelmed her. She cried and the river answered with rain. The flame spirit Fenari taught her heat. Not fire but warmth, the kind that rises from within. "True fire," he hissed, "does not burn unless you wish it to." Naya learned to light her own path, to pull warmth from the bones of winter, to freeze a drop of water mid-air with a thought. The ravens came too, blacker than night and sharper than memory. They perched on her shoulders, whispered riddles and prophecies, some true, some nonsense. But each one taught her something, timing, vision, waiting. They were tricksters but wise and they liked her. She understood them. She never tried to tame them and they respected that. Time passed differently in the forest. Days folded into years like leaves into mulch. Naya grew not just in height but in presence. The shadows grew deeper where she walked. Trees leaned toward her. The wind paused to greet her. At 12 she could melt into the darkness completely. At 14 she could step between trees and emerge miles away, her body moving like wind through reeds. But there were still things she did not know. She did not know her real name. She did not know of the crown that should have been hers, or of the man who had given the order that had sealed her fate. She did not know the queen still lit a single candle every new moon, weeping in silence. But the forest knew. And it waited. One night, under a blood-red moon, Leone took Naya to a pool hidden beneath hanging moss and silver vines. "It is time," she said. Naya looked into the water. For the first time she saw her reflection, not just her face but herself. The eyes that shimmered like dusk, the skin that caught starlight, the silence that clung to her like mist. But in the water the shadows shifted, and a crown floated just above her brow. It was not gold or jeweled. It was made of thorn, night, and fate. "What am I?" Naya whispered. "Not what," said Leone. "Oh, you are the child of betrayal and prophecy. You are the echo of something broken that will break again. "You are Naya. But that is only the name we gave you. Soon you will learn the one that was stolen." The pool rippled. In it for just a moment Naya saw a throne. Fire. A king with eyes full of fear. Something stirred deep inside her, familiar, cold, inevitable. She turned from the pool. When the night no longer fears the day, said Leone. When the crown that cast you away begs for the dark. Naya did not speak again. She did not ask more questions. She walked back into the forest and the shadows followed her. The night had not just raised her. It had claimed her. And one day she would return not alone, but as the daughter of everything they tried to erase. Naya sat on a curved branch high above the forest floor, her dark eyes fixed on the horizon where the kingdom shimmered faintly beneath the distant moonlight. The trees around her stirred softly as if whispering secrets to one another. For years she had called this place home, raised by shadows that danced when no one watched and by creatures that spoke in silence but left truths etched in her mind. But something had shifted recently. The wind carried weight, not just the rustle of leaves or the hum of night insects, but a sound beneath sound, like voices trapped inside the breeze. The first time she heard it, she had thought it was her own thoughts echoing back at her. A distant cry, muffled yet raw, rode through the branches and across her skin. It came when the moon rose to its highest point, pale and watchful. That night Naya did not sleep. She sat on the forest floor surrounded by flickering lights that were not flames and listened. A woman's sob. A child's cough. A plea. Again and again the voices came. And then a word, one she hadn't heard in years, home. She rose and walked barefoot along the forest's glowing roots. Her cloak of woven shadow draped behind her, and with every step the creatures of the night stirred. An owl with 3 eyes flew beside her. Foxes with fur like starlight circled her feet. She was their child now, but something in her heart had started to pull, something she couldn't ignore. Under the ancient sycamore where she had first opened her eyes as a baby, she stood. The tree was a guardian and had long been her guide. Its bark bore symbols from an age when gods walked openly and time bled freely into dreams. That night, the bark shimmered. Naya placed her palm against it. "I hear them," she whispered. "Why now?" The tree trembled. Its roots shifted. A voice, low as earth and old as sleep, replied, "Because you are ready. The pain of the kingdom seeps into the winds. It has waited long enough for its rightful daughter." Naya's hand withdrew. Her breath shuddered. "But they cast me out. My father, he feared me." "He feared what he did not understand," said the tree. "He feared the night. But you are the night, not its terror but its truth." The next few days Naya trained harder. She no longer ran with the wolves just for sport. She practiced the silent walk of the shadows, learning to disappear even when surrounded. She called to the wind and listened until it answered in full sentences. She sat in moonlight so long that her skin glowed faintly when the sky darkened. The spirits of the forest began visiting again, the long slumbering ones with masks of bone and hands like smoke. They bowed to her. They called her by names she had never heard. Daughter of the forgotten moon. Princess of the unseen path. She who listens when others look away. One night the moon grew red. It hung heavy, almost close enough to touch. Naya stood on the cliffs, arms stretched wide. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked. "What can I give them?" The moon did not speak in words. Instead it opened the sky and Naya saw the kingdom, not its beauty, not its towers, but its sickness. She saw children begging at gates while nobles feasted. She saw guards burning down homes for sport. She saw a young boy, no older than 10, whipped for stealing a loaf of bread. She saw a mother burying her daughter because the healer demanded gold before mercy. And she saw the king, her father, sitting on a golden throne with eyes that held no sorrow. She fell to her knees. "Why show me this?" The wind answered this time. "Because your blood is theirs. Their pain is yours. And you have power born from it all." Naya rose slowly. "I was born to bring darkness. That's what they said." "No," whispered the wind. "You were born with darkness, not for it. There is a difference. The first consumes. The second liberates." She returned to the ancient sycamore and asked the night spirits to gather. They came in silence, emerging from trees, from fog, from shadows stitched between leaves. One by one they circled her. She stood in their center, hair loose like ink against her back. "I have heard the call," she said. "The people suffer. And I carry their cries. I will return, not as vengeance but as voice. I ask you to walk beside me." No one spoke. Instead they bowed. One of the oldest spirits, a faceless woman cloaked in stars, stepped forward and handed her a blade. It wasn't metal but carved from obsidian moonstone, etched with old runes. "For the truth that cuts," the woman said. Another spirit offered her a cloak that shimmered between visible and not. "For the path that must remain hidden." And the third, a beast with a mouth of glowing teeth but kind eyes, dropped a single feather into her palm. "For mercy even when wrath is justified." Naya's heart pounded. Her path had begun. That night, she climbed the tallest tree in the forest and looked once more at the kingdom far away. And though she had no map, no allies beyond the night, she knew where to go. The wind no longer whispered pain, now it whispered her name. And beneath the moon's gentle eye, Naya stepped into the dark, carrying the promise of dawn where none had dared look. The border between forest and kingdom had long been marked by an ancient wall of crumbling stone and forgotten symbols. Few dared approach it, especially at night, for they said the shadows near it whispered in voices not heard since the old times. But that night the silence was broken. Naya stepped through the treeline, her bare feet brushing the moss as though the earth itself opened a path for her. The moment her skin crossed the invisible veil, the wind changed direction. A low hum stirred in the trees and the stars blinked, one by one as if bowing to her return. Her cloak, woven from threads gifted by the night weavers, shimmered with the softness of mist and the silence of owls. Her eyes glowed faintly, not in a way that startled, but in a way that made men uncertain whether they had truly seen her at all. Every step she took was deliberate, each movement guided by memories older than any song sung in the kingdom's halls. As she walked, the land responded. Flowers that bloomed only at midnight turned toward her as she passed. The grass darkened behind her. Her presence bent the fabric of night, stretching it over her like armor. She was no longer just the child banished at birth. She was something else now, a convergence of prophecy, forest, and vengeance. Villagers in the outer fields were the first to sense her arrival. An old farmer, kneeling in his garden beneath the moon, paused when he saw his withered tomato plants glowing a soft blue. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it a trick of age, but the glow remained. The scent of soil deepened, like something old and good had awakened beneath it. When he placed his hand on the plant, warmth pulsed through his fingers. His knees gave way and he whispered a prayer to no god he knew. Farther along the path, 2 night guards stationed at the kingdom's outer checkpoint felt a sudden chill. The fire in their torch flickered violently, then snuffed out. One of them, bold but foolish, drew his sword and shouted into the wind. No response came, only the faint sound of footsteps circling them. But when they turned, no one was there. They stood back to back, blades drawn, sweat dripping despite the cold. Then they heard a whisper, "You watched the gates when they took me away." A gust swept past and their helmets flew from their heads, rolling like toys in the dirt. In the darkened villages, shadows began to stretch longer than they should. Candles flickered even when there was no wind. Windows frosted at their edges though it was midsummer. Children pointed to corners and asked who the tall lady was, the one with eyes like silver leaves. Their mothers pulled them away and muttered charms taught by grandmothers who had once seen the Queen of Night dance across rivers. At the temple, the high priest dreamed of a girl standing in the moonlight with stars braided into her hair. She said nothing, but when she raised her hand, the temple's stone pillars cracked and fell in his vision. He awoke screaming, his bed drenched in sweat. He rushed outside only to see an owl perched on the temple gate, its eyes golden and unblinking, watching him as though judging an ancient debt. Naya moved unseen but deeply felt. Each town she passed through did not see her, but signs of her arrival remained. Dreams thick with symbols, wells that ran deeper and animals behaving strangely. A stable boy claimed a horse bowed its head to a shadow by the trees. A baker found her sourdough rose before she'd even added yeast. Magic, they whispered, old magic, the kind we were told was buried. But not all welcomed her return. At the palace, the king paced beneath golden chandeliers that suddenly dimmed. His dreams had been uneasy for weeks, filled with branches grasping his throne and wolves howling inside his halls. He had banished the girl. She was nothing. A problem removed before it ever bloomed. Yet something pressed on his chest, a weight that would not lift. He summoned his sages, demanded smoke readings and blood signs, but all they could say was, "The forest has stirred." He doubled the patrols on the kingdom's edge, sent riders into the woods, but none returned. One came back without eyes, guided only by a crow that followed him through the night. "She's walking," he mumbled over and over. "She's walking with the stars in her shadow." Naya made no announcement, lit no fires, summoned no armies. Yet the world knew. Her return was not one of war drums but of memory, the old kind that makes stone tremble and rivers pause. She walked past the statue of a former queen and whispered her name. The next morning, that statue wept black water from its eyes. A librarian opened a forgotten scroll and found the ink wet again, spelling out Naya of the Night. Some tried to capture her, thinking reward would follow. A group of mercenaries laid traps in the woods where she was last seen. But by dawn they were found asleep in a circle, each with a feather placed over their heart and a sprouting vine between their fingers. One of them woke with a vision of a throne cracked in half, and a girl with shadow wings sitting beneath it. In one town, a healer claimed to see her walking at dusk. She offered no name, only a question: "Do you remember the moon's promise?" The healer wept and dropped to her knees. When she looked up, Naya was gone, but her well had filled with water for the first time in 3 years. By the time Naya reached the outer palace road, the people were whispering stories already, stories that traveled faster than horses and deeper than proclamations. "The banished one walks," they said. "The girl with midnight in her veins has returned." No one knew exactly what she looked like, and yet every description seemed to match: tall and graceful, hair like raven silk, voice like dusk. In the palace garden, a tree bloomed out of season, its blossoms silver and fragrant like the scent of rain. The queen's old chambermaid touched one and fainted. When she awoke she said only, "She is near." Naya stood at the final gate, where her mother had once wept as she was taken. She placed her hand on the cold iron and it melted into mist. The guards stationed there dropped to their knees, not out of command but out of understanding, the kind that cannot be taught, only felt. They saw not a girl, but the shape of a storm held still, the breath before the lightning strikes. The palace lights flickered. Birds flew backwards. The royal hounds howled and would not stop. Naya took one step, and the moon appeared directly above the tower, though it was not its time to rise. All shadows leaned toward her, bowing in silence. And somewhere deep in the ground a voice said, "She has returned. The night walks with her. And the end begins." The queen sat still as her ladies combed her long black hair, but her eyes were fixed on the mirror in front of her. It had grown dull, the silver backing now smudged with an odd black film that refused to clean. Every time she looked into it she saw a flicker, just a breath of something behind her shoulder. At first she dismissed it as fatigue or the flickering of the torches lining the chamber walls. But the flicker had turned into a shadow, and now the shadow had grown eyes. Silver eyes. The new queen, Elira, had grown up knowing power was earned, not inherited. She had no royal blood but had caught the king's favor during a courtly feast with her wit and ambition. He had married her soon after the mysterious death of his first wife, a woman he rarely spoke of. Whispers spoke of grief, betrayal, and a prophecy. Elira had paid no mind then. She had been too busy building her place within the castle walls, commanding servants, aligning alliances, and ensuring the king's attention never strayed. But lately something had shifted. She would wake up at night in a sweat, her dreams fractured with half-seen images: a forest of whispering trees, a girl with skin like twilight and silver eyes that pierced through night, and a crown shattering into pieces. The girl never spoke. She only stared. And each time the queen woke gasping, clutching her chest. It began slowly. At first it was the light. Lamps would go out for no reason. The sun, once bright through her chamber windows, now seemed veiled in gray. No matter how many tapestries they hung or fires they lit, the queen's wing of the palace remained oddly cold. Her attendants began murmuring of drafts, of unseen eyes, of hushed breaths when no one else was in the room. Then the whispers began. Servants reported hearing voices in the hallways at night, low, melodic, and mournful. "She's coming," one would say. "The moon rises for her," said another. One maid was found hiding behind the curtains, shivering and crying, repeating the same line: "She walks the halls. She walks the halls." The queen had her removed, sent to the far reaches of the kingdom, but that did not stop the murmurs. They spread like vines in moonlight. In the royal gardens, where roses once bloomed, a new kind of flower had begun to sprout, black petals edged with silver, opening only at night. No gardener planted them. No one could explain them. But they grew always facing the moon. One morning, Elira walked to the balcony and found every fountain had frozen over, in the middle of spring. Around the edges of the ice, symbols were etched that none could read. But when she traced her finger over them, they pulsed with a faint glow, and the same vision returned to her mind: a girl with silver eyes standing beneath the moon, holding a sword made of shadows. Elira went to the king, her voice steady but her heart trembling. "She's back," she whispered. The king looked at her, brows furrowed. "Who?" "You know who. The child." He scoffed. That child died in the forest years ago. She was taken from us to protect this kingdom. She's gone. But even as he spoke, a falcon flew in through the open window, wings black as pitch, eyes silver like glass, and dropped a single feather at Elira's feet before vanishing into the shadows. Elira said nothing more. That night her dream was clearer than ever. She stood in the palace courtyard. The air was thick with silence, the kind that presses against the bones. And there she was again, the girl. She was older now, nearly grown, clothed in robes that rippled like smoke in starlight. Her hair floated around her face like ink in water. Her eyes were silver, glowing but not cold. They were knowing. You built your walls high, the girl said softly. But the night does not knock. Elira tried to move, to speak, but she could not. The girl stepped forward. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. I am not your shadow, she whispered. I am what your throne tried to erase. Elira awoke screaming, drenched in sweat. Her guards burst in, weapons drawn, but found nothing. Only a single black flower on her pillow, still glistening with dew. The queen demanded protection. Soldiers stationed at every entrance, torches lit around the clock, prayers spoken in every corridor. She called for the royal priestess to perform a cleansing ritual, but when the priestess entered the chamber, she froze mid-chant, turned pale, and whispered, "The dark does not want me here." She left without finishing. The king grew frustrated, calling her fears childish. He could not feel the dread curling in the corners of the palace. He could not see the eyes in the dark. He did not hear the voice in the mirror whispering, "She's returned." One morning, the queen went to her mirror again, determined to face her reflection, to reclaim her sense of order. But the mirror showed not her own face, it showed a throne empty, surrounded by shadows. The girl stood beside it, eyes closed, head bowed, not in defeat but in reverence. Behind her stood hundreds, faceless and silent, cloaked in black. They pulsed like a single breath. An army. A gathering of night. Elira backed away, her hands trembling. She screamed for it to stop, for it to be removed. But when the guards came and shattered the mirror, it cracked not like glass but like stone. Inside it was not hollow, it was dark, impossibly deep, as though the glass had become a doorway. The queen began to refuse food. She sat by the fire, eyes vacant, repeating verses of old lullabies meant to ward off spirits. Her maids found her kneeling in the hallway once, whispering to the moon. She was born beneath it, she murmured. And the moon never forgot her. Meanwhile, in the villages, stories began to stir. Children spoke of a figure walking through the woods, never seen directly but always just beyond the trees. Farmers left offerings at the forest's edge, bowls of water, bits of bread, sprigs of lavender, and found them replaced by black feathers and moonlit stones. One night, a group of guards assigned to patrol the outer palace walls vanished. Their torches were found extinguished in a perfect circle. No signs of struggle. No footprints. Just silence. And then, for the first time in 100 years, the moon did not rise. The sky grew darker than ever before, a velvet void stretching endlessly. The people looked up in fear, the animals grew restless, and the wind whispered only one word. Nah. The queen locked herself in her chamber. She lit every candle she could find, drew symbols on the doors and clutched the king's robe like a child. But even he began to feel it, the heaviness, the tension in the air, the sense of a tide turning. The queen wept. She is not just the child of prophecy, she whispered to the dark. She is the prophecy itself. And we are not ready. Far away in the deep woods, Naya stood beneath the stars. The night wrapped around her like a second skin. The forgotten gods had given her strength. The shadows had trained her well. She heard the heartbeat of the kingdom pulsing faster. She was coming home. And this time she would not knock. The villages lay silent under the full moon's silver gaze. That night, Naya walked between them as though the darkness rose to make a path before her. She carried no torch, no banner, no horn. Only the quiet certainty of those born to the night. When she approached the first village, a faint light flickered in a locked cell. A prisoner cried out, hearing boots at the gate. The guard on watch heard a breeze, then nothing more. The cell door swung open. Dawn's pale sky found the prisoner lying on the cold stone floor, his chains melted, breath shallow but free. Naya was gone when he rose and stumbled out into the square. All he saw was moonlight drifting across empty streets, and a single black feather resting at his feet. Word spread by morning. Priests clustered in their sanctuaries, confused. Healers whispered in the courtyard, healing hands suddenly warm even across distance. Families rushed to the infirmary in the next town over, where patients lay with fever and infection. They woke by midnight asking only for water, only for comfort, only for forgiveness. The healers swore they had not touched them. But the wounds closed. The fevers broke. When they placed bowls of moonlight water by the bedsides, patients drank and the glow faded. They called her the moon's daughter. In the second village, the fields had been trampled by soldiers months ago. Crops wilted in defiance of sun or rain. That night, under the same moon that had watched her birth, Naya walked through the ruined fields. Her footsteps disturbed nothing. She knelt by the blasted stalks and whispered in a language older than memory. Shadows curled at her side like fingers, then dove into the earth. Next morning, green shoots climbed through the cracked soil. Flowers bloomed silver in the dawn light, their petals uncurling as though awake from a long sleep. Her return was not vanity or vengeance, but redemption for those abandoned by law and rulers. On the forest edge, animals gathered. The foxes emerged from burrows, the deer stepped down from the hills. Wolves watched from branches. Birds with obsidian feathers perched above the roads. A silent company formed, but human eyes saw none if none looked for her. In that darkness they recognized power not with fear but with loyalty. Exiled warriors came too. Men and women who had fled the king's cruelty, survivors of burned villages, descendants of the families destroyed in the purge of dissent. They walked without pride but into order. They spoke her name in broken tongues, Moon's daughter echoed across campfires and ravines. They rose at her signal, moving like ghosts beneath the clouds. In one town the mayor tried to rally guards. It's superstition, he argued. We'll chase her back into the forest. But that night, a group of soldiers went searching, only to find their weapons rusted where they'd left them, their horses returned with manes tangled into knots of ivy. They fled at dawn, swearing to resign. Meanwhile the spirit beings, those of wind and root and storm, accompanied Naya's march. Ghostly flames flickered in abandoned barns. Statues of kings and queens leaned toward the gate, cracked with age but alive with message. The boundary of the woods pulsed with memory. Whenever Naya crossed back into the forest, the trees bowed. When she crossed out again, the air hummed. At midnight, between the 7th and 8th hour, she arrived at the largest city. Soldiers still patrolled with torches and chainmail. But the wind carried another message: they fear her. As she entered, lantern flames dimmed. The guards felt cold inside their armor chambers. From the shadows came ragged figures, escapees from prison, broken people, mothers holding empty bowls, all walking behind her in silence. They did not step on the streets, they flowed. A river of black-shrouded shapes with silver eyes and stoic resolve. The silent army stood before the palace gates. The king's soldiers grimaced, trying to shout orders, trying to raise swords. But they could not see more than shadows. The torches sputtered out. The guards balked. Some dropped their swords, some knelt, some turned away. None moved toward her. At that moment, the royal banners fluttered in wind though no breeze blew. The flower petals along the walls wilted. The moonlight turned a pale blue and warmed instead of chilling. The palace doors opened on their own. Only the king remained behind a barrier of gold and fear. Naya stood at the gates. Her cloak drifted. Her eyes glowed pale. She spoke, voice low but steady across the silent throng. I come not to rule but to walk among those forgotten. I come for justice buried by walls and fear. And I bring the night with me, not to darken the world but to reveal. A million faces, villagers, warriors, spirits, rose together and pressed against the gates. They did not break them. The gates opened wider. Inside the throne room, the king had lit lamps, summoned advisors and generals. He stared at the doors, expecting swords or siege. Instead, he heard a silence rolling up the carpeted steps. Then he saw her, Naya, walking between shadows like she'd been made of them, leading an unseen host. He rose, trembling. His crown felt heavy as stone on his brow. You've brought the night, he said. My father, she replied. You banished your daughter for fear. You feared the darkness. I came to show you the light. He laughed, but it came out as a cough. His lips cracked, thirsting. This is magic, he gasped. This is witchcraft. No, she said. This is mercy. With those words, the lamps around them flickered and extinguished. The guards at the perimeter gasped. Their chains rattled at their sides. The statues of royal ancestors shattered into frost and ash. On the floor, the emblem of the throne cracked like glass breaking. Naya took a single step forward, and the palace trembled. The army outside moved forward silently. They did not push or threaten. They simply existed. A presence, solid and unyielding. The king slumped onto his dais. He looked at Naya with fear and awe tangled in his expression. You are the prophecy fulfilled. She knelt, but not toward him, toward those behind him, toward every suffering soul he had ignored. When she rose, the moon shone through the skylight for the first time in years. The icy gloom receded. She did not demand the throne. She did not seek vengeance. She stood quietly by his side and raised her hand, and from it blossomed a pale silver glow that spread outward. Where the light touched, walls healed, wounds healed, broken stones rejoined. The corrupt plaques were cleansed. Records rewritten, this time in truth. Names of the fallen were spoken. The night had marched, not to conquer but to return. And the silent army faded into mist and memory, leaving only the crowd of freed, healed, forgiven people behind. Naya walked to the steps leading into the forest. Behind her, dawn light peeked through the palace windows, a new day born from her walk in darkness. She turned once, eyes shining. You have your proof, she said, of what can rise when fear yields to justice. Then she walked away into the trees. The army did not follow. The whispers faded. The moon hung overhead in stillness, and for the first time, peace, steady, shared, gentle, settled across the land. Villagers whispered of her return for generations. They spoke of a silver-eyed woman who walked with shadows and brought healing. Children left bowls of rainwater on doorsteps under full moons. Guards planted wildflowers where their weapons lay. And every new moon, the king lit a single candle not out of. Torches burned like nervous eyes across the kingdom. Every street, every tower, even the quietest corners of the palace were drenched in flickering firelight. The king had given his order without pause. No corner shall go dark. No traveler shall walk under moonlight. His voice had shaken when he gave it, though he masked it behind iron. The soldiers obeyed, but even they whispered. For the first time, fear sat taller than the throne itself. He called it a necessary protection. But everyone knew it was fear. Fear of the prophecy. Fear of the dark. Fear of a daughter the king refused to name aloud. No one dared to ask what had changed. Why suddenly the kingdom had become obsessed with light. Why nightfall now came with trumpet warnings, or why citizens were whipped for lighting a single candle too late or too low. But behind closed doors people whispered of her, the girl cloaked in night with eyes like silver moons, and how the shadows moved at her will. The king began to unravel slowly but noticeably. He sat on the throne during council meetings, speaking little, his eyes darting toward corners and curtains. He scolded his generals not for failure, but for letting a breeze come through the windows. When a bat flew across the court hall one evening, he screamed, a short, sharp, undignified sound, before ordering the entire palace roof to be reinforced. He had the royal painter hung because his latest portrait showed too much shadow beneath the chin. In his bedchamber, the queen no longer slept beside him. Not because of distance or duty, but because he refused to sleep at all. He paced. He muttered. He scribbled prayers to sun gods and demanded daily sacrifices of light oils and white feathers. But no matter what he did, the dreams grew darker. In sleep he was no longer a king. He was a boy again, barefoot and cold, standing before a forest. He saw a crib, his daughters, left beneath a tree as the moon rose full and sharp. He heard a whisper, even light cast shadows. And yours have teeth. He woke up sweating, nails bitten raw. The queen, though younger and untouched by the first prophecy, had started locking her doors. Twice she caught the king speaking to a mirror, asking it who the girl was and how far she'd come. Once she found him kneeling, hands trembling before a child's drawing, a stick figure with glowing eyes and arms wide open. The queen burned it, but the ashes kept reappearing. Guards stationed outside his chambers rotated every 2 hours. Not for protection but because they refused to stay longer. They heard voices, soft songs and languages no one had spoken in centuries. One soldier claimed he saw a handprint appear on the mirror from inside the glass, a small, feminine one. As the kingdom trembled under these unseen forces, so too did its king. His food was tested thrice before eating. He banned dark fabrics in court, claiming they reminded him of funerals. The royal hounds were put down when they barked at the moon. He ordered every forest near the border burned, but the flames refused to catch in one particular stretch, the stretch where she'd been left. The moon refused to be ignored. Every night, without fail, it rose bigger and clearer as if mocking his firelit kingdom. Even when clouds covered the skies, its glow managed to slip through, like a secret remembered. The king began sleeping beneath lanterns hung on chains, chanting to himself words no one understood. He ordered his servants to shave their heads, remove all mirrors and recite sun hymns before speaking to him. But his fear was not of war. Not of an army. His fear was intimate, deep, the kind that came not from a sword but a memory. The prophecy had not promised a battle. It had promised a return. He remembered it now, clearer than he allowed himself for years. The seer's voice had trembled the day Naya was born. She will not need to raise her hand. The night will do so for her. And when she bows, it will not be before you but over you. He had laughed then. A child? A girl? But now those words echoed louder than any horn or trumpet. Because the girl had not vanished. The shadows hadn't taken her. They'd simply raised her. He started accusing his court of betrayal. He banished his own brother for letting his candles burn too low. He beheaded 3 scribes for using dark ink. And still the night came. The people, already weary under his rule, began to shift their eyes to the darkness with hope. They whispered about the moon's daughter, how she'd healed a widow's blind son, how prisoners awoke to find their chains undone. They painted moons on their doors, left bowls of black salt by their windows. Farmers told tales of how their crops glowed blue at night when she passed. And the king, in all his fire and fear, could not stop it. He ordered the archives sealed, thinking if no one could read the old prophecy it might fade. He declared the moon an enemy. His army was ordered to shoot arrows into the night, a foolish, desperate gesture. One soldier who refused was found with a moon carved into his chest, and yet no wound. But the dreams did not stop. Now the king saw not just the forest but a woman, grown, regal, terrifying in her quiet. She stood with the night around her like a living thing. And she never spoke, only stared. One night, after screaming awake from one such vision, the king clawed at his throne, ripping the golden silk. He ordered it replaced with white stone, pure and sun-kissed. But the next morning the new throne bore a crack down the middle, and at its base the faint print of a barefoot child. The queen begged him to stop. She asked for mercy, reason, lightness. But mercy was beyond him now. Reason had been banished with his daughter. He stood in the throne room, face thin, eyes rimmed with sleepless nights. "She will not take what is mine," he whispered. "She is a shadow. A mistake. A prophecy twisted by fools." Yet even as he said it, the flames in the hall guttered. One by one the torches died. The throne room plunged into silence, not darkness, for the moonlight had already begun spilling through the windows. And in that moonlight dust danced. Shapes flickered. A low hum filled the air, like breath before a storm. The guards reached for their swords but no command came. Because the king could not speak. He could only feel. The fear had arrived. And it had silver eyes. The wind shifted with purpose as the moon began its slow climb toward the center of the sky. For days the air had felt heavier, as though the world itself was holding its breath. In the forest beyond the kingdom's edge, Naya stood barefoot on the damp earth, her silver eyes reflecting the widening moon above. Around her, the spirits stirred more urgently now, whispering in tongues older than man, swirling in the shadows like smoke. The eclipse was near. The final sign. The moment when night would swallow day, and truth would rise from darkness. She had waited for this since the night her soul first touched the stars. All around her, the quiet army had grown. The beasts of the woods, panthers with eyes like coals, owls that watched without blinking, wolves that bowed their heads in silence, had come first. Then the exiled ones had arrived. Warriors banished for refusing cruelty, healers cast out for speaking truth, mothers who had lost their children to the king's greed. Each had heard the whispers in the night. Each had seen the moon's glow guide their steps to Naya. They called her the moon's daughter. Some bowed. Others merely stood beside her with fire in their eyes. None questioned why the wind listened when she spoke. Tonight their torches remained unlit. She had forbidden fire. "Let the darkness walk with us," she had said. "Let the king see what he feared." She stood in the center of their camp now, tracing ancient symbols into the dirt with her fingers. As her hands moved, the marks glowed faintly, then pulsed with rhythm as though the earth remembered her blood. From the branches above, the night spirits watched. Old gods with no names, shadows with eyes of violet and gold, their bodies made of silence itself. They had taught her to listen to the dark, to read the wind, to step without sound. But now they stood back. She was ready. Across the kingdom the eclipse was already being whispered about. In the capital, the queen had stopped looking in mirrors altogether. Servants claimed they showed 2 faces, hers and a silver-eyed girl behind her. The king had not slept in nights. His face grew thinner, his lips drier. He wore the crown longer than usual, as if afraid it would disappear the moment he set it down. The moon's ascent was no longer gentle. It was a march. and Naya began hers. They did not move like an army. There was no sound of drums or iron boots. There was no war cry. Just the stillness, thick and deep, that came when the forest held its tongue. Villages along the outer kingdom saw shadows pass their fields, but not a single leaf moved. Some woke to find their windows open and offerings left on their doorstep. Clean water, herbs, small stones shaped like crescent moons. Others saw figures in the trees, silver-eyed and silent, watching. And when they blinked, the figures were gone. As Naya walked, the ground behind her softened, almost glowing. The stars seemed to draw nearer, the moon growing impossibly large. Night animals followed her, not in chaos but with reverence, as though pulled by a memory they had forgotten. Every step brought her closer to the capital, and every breath drew the shadows tighter around her. In the capital, the king summoned priests. He called them to chant through the day and burn herbs through the night. He sent messengers into the woods to offer gold in return for silence. He even built a pyre near the palace gates, large enough for a dozen bodies, to remind the people of his power. But the people had already begun to change. They no longer looked to the palace when afraid. They looked to the moon. The queen, ever watchful, had already started packing jewels in secret. She told the king they were merely being counted, but her hands trembled. She dreamed each night of a forest swallowing the palace, of vines creeping through the walls, of a single bow from a silver-eyed girl that shattered the crown. She had never seen Naya, not with her waking eyes. But she knew her. All mothers knew their doom, and this one had skin too fair to be born from shadow. And now the shadow was coming. As the day before the eclipse ended, Naya stood on a hill that overlooked the kingdom. Her followers, quiet as breath, stopped behind her. From that height, they could see the palace glinting faintly, the torches burning too brightly. It looked small now, just a golden tooth in the earth. Naya raised her hand. The army behind her knelt. But she did not move forward yet. Instead, she closed her eyes and listened. The wind carried stories, old ones, deep ones. The crying of the queen's maids, the laughter of children born in hiding, the trembling of horses in the stables. The air knew all things. It carried them without shame. And it told her this: the time was right. The moon was nearly full now, its light sharp and pale. The eclipse would begin with the next sunset. Naya turned to her people. She did not shout. She simply raised her palm. And the spirits began to move. From behind trees, rivers, and caves they came, not just animals and warriors now but the forgotten dead. The ones lost to fire and sword. Mothers who had burned for witchcraft. Daughters who had vanished in the king's hunts. Their forms were smoke and starlight, but their presence was a storm. The earth quaked gently as they walked beside her. When the sun began to lower, the wind screamed. Birds fled inland. Dogs in the city howled and refused to stop. The king stood on his balcony, clutching his robe, watching as the sky began to change. A darkness gathered around the edges of the sun, slow but undeniable. The eclipse had begun. He called his guards. He rang bells. He ordered every gate shut, every torch relit, every priest to his knees. But the light was leaving. And still Naya walked. With each step toward the capital, the air thickened. A low hum began to rise from the forest. Not a song, not a scream, but something older than both. It vibrated in the bones. Trees leaned in. The stars appeared in full daylight. The sun was being swallowed by the moon. As the eclipse reached its height, the capital fell silent. And then, the gates creaked open on their own. No soldier touched them. No wind pushed. They simply parted, and from the shadows beyond, Naya entered. She wore no crown. She carried no weapon. Her hands were bare, her eyes aglow. The city held its breath. The torches flickered, then died one by one until only the moonlight remained. She walked through the streets where she had been cursed before she could even speak. She passed the walls that had once laughed at her exile. And the people, silent, tearful, trembling, bowed. Not in fear. In return. Above, the eclipse reached its peak. The world was neither day nor night. It was something in between, a breath between truths. And in that moment, Naya reached the palace gates. The time had come.